Ada Mensah walked out of her sister's wedding, left her cheating ex slow dancing with another woman, left the crowd whispering, left her entire life as she knew it. She sat on a fountain in the October cold in an ivory satin gown and called the one number she swore she'd never call. Dante Romano, Chicago's most dangerous man. The man she'd walked away from 11 months ago because loving him meant living in his world. He answered on the first ring. She said 3 words. Come get me. 20 minutes later, a matte black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulls up. 2 SUVs behind it. Armed men deploy. And Dante Romano steps out. 6 feet of controlled power in a black suit. Gray eyes that see everything. The kind of man who makes entire rooms go quiet. He walks past her ex-boyfriend like he doesn't exist. Extends his hand to Ada. Says, come with me. And the entire wedding watches as she disappears into the Chicago night with a man who runs the city from the shadows. But someone else was watching too. Nikolai Petrov, Dante's rival, the man who's been waiting 23 years to destroy him, sees everything. Sees Dante come for Ada publicly. Sees what she means to him. And now Ada isn't just the woman who called. She's leverage. A pressure point. The one thing that matters enough to make Dante vulnerable. By midnight, Dante's windows are shot out. By morning, Ada's standing in a warehouse on Calumet Avenue between 2 crime lords negotiating her life. What happens when 3 words, come get me, start a war? When the man you walked away from comes back, and the entire city watches. When your ex-boyfriend realizes he lost you to someone who makes Chicago kneel. Stay till the end for the moment that changes everything. Welcome to Afro-K Dark Diaries TV besties. This is 3 words at midnight. Comment come get me if you'd make that call. Comment dangerous if you'd choose the powerful man over the safe one. Like if Dante Romano just became your new standard. Subscribe because when a woman remembers her worth and a crime lord remembers what matters, the whole city has to rearrange itself. Let's go. The chandelier above the Grand Aurora Ballroom was the most beautiful thing Ada Mensah had seen all evening. She kept her eyes on it because looking at chandeliers was better than looking at Caleb Osei slow dancing with another woman 40 feet away from her. Better than looking at her sister Simone, radiant and oblivious at the center of her own wedding. Better than catching the eyes of the 3 aunties near the dessert table who had already cycled through pity, judgment, and the particular kind of satisfaction people feel when someone else's humiliation confirms something they always suspected. Ada had been Simone's maid of honor. She had given the speech, the one she'd rehearsed 47 times in her bathroom mirror, and she'd delivered it without trembling, without crying, without letting a single syllable crack under the weight of what was happening behind her in the crowd. And then she'd heard him laugh. Not loud. Caleb was too calculated for loud. Just enough. Just the right pitch to cut through the applause and land directly in the soft part of her chest that still, after 8 weeks, hadn't fully healed. She'd kept her eyes steady and her voice steady and her hands steady on the microphone. She had finished the speech. She had smiled. She had raised the glass. And then, with the most composed movement she had ever made in her life, she had set the glass down, walked off the stage, crossed the ballroom floor, pushed through the doors, and stepped out into the Chicago night. The October air hit her like cold water. She found the fountain at the edge of the venue's courtyard and sat on its stone rim and let herself shake. Just for a moment, just here, just where no one could see. And she pressed her palm to her chest because her heart was doing something it shouldn't in a good ivory satin gown. She pulled out her phone. She scrolled past Simone's name. Past her mother's. Past the friends she'd already texted excuses to 3 times this week. Her thumb stopped. Dante Romano. She hadn't opened that contact in 11 months. She had kept it because deleting it felt like a decision she wasn't ready to make. Because some names you keep the way you keep a match, not to burn anything, just to remember that fire exists. She pressed call before the reasonable part of her brain could catch up. It rang once. Just once. Ada. His voice. Low, unhurried, warm in the way that very dangerous things are warm. The way a fire is warm, the way a current is warm before it pulls you under. He said her name the way he always had, like it was something he'd been holding carefully and was relieved to set down. Her throat tightened. Can you come get me? Silence. Not the silence of confusion. Not the silence of a man weighing his options. The silence of a man who had already decided before she finished asking. Where are you? Grand Aurora. Michigan Avenue. The fountain outside. Stay there. The line went dead. Ada stared at her phone. Her reflection looked back at her from the dark screen. A woman in ivory satin sitting on a fountain rim in the cold, who had just done something she could not take back. The ballroom doors swung open behind her. Caleb stepped out, jacket loose, a cigarette between his fingers, wearing the relaxed expression of a man who has rehearsed his next line. He looked at her on the fountain and shook his head slowly. "Still dramatic," he said. "Left your own sister's wedding reception. Go back inside, Caleb." He walked toward her anyway. That was Caleb's particular skill. The ability to enter spaces he hadn't been invited into and make it feel like your fault for not welcoming him. He stopped 2 feet away and looked down at her with the smile she had once thought was affection and now recognized as appetite. "You look good," he said. "Ivory suits you. I always told you that." "You brought her here on purpose," Ada said quietly. "She wanted to come." "You brought her here on purpose, Caleb." He took a drag of his cigarette. Exhaled slowly, letting the smoke drift toward her face. "You need to learn how to lose gracefully, Ada. Not everything is a war." She looked at him. At this man she had given 3 years to. Who had told her she was too sensitive, too proud, too much, right up until the moment he proved that what he had actually meant was, "You're too much for me to control." She was about to respond. And then headlights appeared at the end of the street. Black. Matte black, not the showy gloss of rented limousines, but the flat, purposeful darkness of something that wasn't trying to impress anyone because it didn't need to. A Rolls-Royce Phantom. Behind it, 2 black SUVs moving in convoy unhurried. The vehicles stopped in front of the Grand Aurora, as though the street had been expecting them. The back door of the Phantom opened. Dante Romano stepped out. Ada's breath left her body. She had spent 11 months trying to remember him accurately, trying to hold him in her mind at the correct size, to keep him from growing in memory the way people do when you haven't seen them. She had told herself that the version of him she carried was exaggerated, romanticized, that she had made him larger than he was because she had been young and overwhelmed, and he had caught her at a moment of particular weakness. She had been wrong. He was exactly this tall, exactly this precise in the way he moved. Black suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt open in the only casual thing about him. He wore the kind of clothes that didn't perform wealth. They simply existed in it. His jaw was sharp, his eyes were the gray of deep water before a storm, and he moved across the pavement with the particular authority of a man who has never once in his life questioned whether he belonged somewhere. Men stepped out of the SUVs. Silent, stationed, not aggressive, just present in the way that made the surrounding air understand that the perimeter had changed. Dante's eyes found her immediately. They moved across her face with a focus that Ada felt physically, a warmth starting at the crown of her head and sliding down the back of her neck, spreading across her collarbones. Then his gaze moved to Caleb, and everything about him went still. The warmth that had been in his expression when he looked at her was simply gone, replaced by something that had no temperature at all. Something colder than cold. Something that made Caleb take a half step back, without apparently deciding to. Dante walked toward them slowly, each step deliberate, precise. His eyes never left Caleb's face. "Is he bothering you?" He asked it quietly, directly to Ada. He didn't look at her when he asked it, kept his eyes on Caleb, the way you keep your eyes on something you've identified as a problem. Ada started. Caleb laughed. "Who the hell are you?" Dante turned to look at him. Just turned. No rush, no performance. And somehow the simple act of his full attention falling on Caleb was worse than any threat. "Don't," Dante said. One word. No raised voice. No posturing. Just one word in a register that made the air around it go quiet. Caleb went pale. Behind them, the ballroom doors burst open. Guests flooded the courtyard, phones already raised, the wedding crowd spilling out in a tide of silk and confusion. Ada heard her sister's voice. "What is happening?" Dante turned to Ada. He extended his hand. Open, unhurried, palm up, not a command. "An offering." "Come with me," he said quietly. Ada looked at his hand, at the long, careful fingers, at the way he held it completely steady. She thought, this is a terrible idea. She thought, I know exactly what I'm doing. She put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, certain, with a pressure that said, I have you, and the contact sent a current straight up her arm that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with him. Behind them, Caleb shouted something. Dante paused at the car door, turned his head just slightly. When he spoke, his voice carried across the courtyard without effort, not loud, just clear. This city has a long memory, he said. Use yours. The car door closed, and Ada Mensah disappeared into the Chicago night inside the most dangerous vehicle she had ever sat in, with her hand still tingling where his fingers had been, and the whole bewildered crowd watching, and her ex-boyfriend standing in the cold with his cigarette burning down to nothing. Inside the car, in the dark, Dante Romano looked at her. Not the way men look at women they have rescued. The way men look at women they have been waiting for. And Ada understood that she had not made a call tonight. She had lit a fuse. The question was, how much of Chicago was going to burn? The Rolls-Royce moved through Chicago like a secret. Other cars moved aside without appearing to. The way water moves around something heavy and permanent. The city lights slid over the windows in long amber stripes. Ada sat with her back straight and her hands clasped in her lap, the ivory satin of her gown spread around her, trying to look like a woman who had intended all of this. Dante sat across from her. Not beside her. Across from her. The length of the car between them, which was both too much distance and nowhere near enough. He had one leg crossed at the knee, one hand resting loose on the seat beside him, watching her with the patient, unhurried attention of a man who has learned that rushing is for people who aren't sure of the outcome. The silence should have been uncomfortable. It wasn't. It was the kind of silence that had weight, that held something between them like a live wire, suspended. "You're staring," Ada said. "Yes," he agreed. He didn't stop. She looked out the window. The lake appeared in the distance, a black expanse beyond the city lights, enormous and still. "He hurt you," Dante said. Not a question. A statement he was making with the same quiet precision he applied to everything. "I'm fine." "I didn't ask if you were fine." Ada turned back to him. The streetlights moved across his face in slow intervals. Light, dark, light, and each time the light returned she saw the same thing. A man whose expression had not changed but whose eyes had. Something in the gray of them had gone darker. "He cheated," she said. Simple. She was tired of cushioning it. 8 weeks ago. With a woman I worked with. He brought her tonight because he wanted you to feel small, Dante said. Her throat tightened. Yes. Dante looked at her for a long moment. And did it work? The honest answer took a moment to find. For approximately 4 minutes, she said. And then I got angry. Something shifted in his expression. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile but adjacent to one. Good. The car passed through iron gates that opened without anyone being called. Ada had forgotten this about his world. The way it anticipated him. The way everything in his vicinity moved as though it had been waiting. His estate sat at the edge of Lake Michigan like it had grown there. Stone and dark wood and glass, 3 stories of controlled elegance, surrounded by grounds that were lit subtly, precisely. The kind of lighting that said, "We see everything and choose what to reveal." Inside smelled like him. This hit her before anything visual did. That particular note of cedar and something darker underneath it, something she had no proper name for except his. She had not been inside this house in 11 months, and her body remembered it with a completeness that made her simultaneously furious and resigned. The staff disappeared without being told. The doors closed. They were alone. Dante walked to the bar and poured 2 glasses of something amber without asking. He carried hers across the room and held it out. Their fingers touched on the glass, just the briefest overlap, barely a contact, and Ada felt it in her wrists. "I shouldn't have called you," she said. "You already said that in the car." He hadn't moved back. He stood close enough that she had to look up at him, close enough that she was aware of the warmth that radiated from him, the particular gravity of a person who occupies space like they mean it. "And I'll give you the same answer. You called. That's enough." "It's not enough, Dante. You can't just appear at my sister's wedding with." "You called me," he said again. Softly, like the repetition was patient rather than insistent. "You could have called anyone. You called me." She had no answer to that because it was true. She took a step back and found the couch and sat down, needing the width between them before she made a decision she couldn't take back. Dante did not follow. He respected distance. That was something she had always known about him, that he would not come where he had not been invited, but that the invitation once given he took seriously. "Why didn't you hate me?" she asked. She had not planned to ask it tonight. It came out anyway. "For leaving. For choosing Marcus, Caleb. For saying I wanted normal, and then calling you the moment normal showed me who it really was." Dante turned his glass slowly in his hand. He looked at it for a moment before he looked at her. "Because," he said, "you were the only person who ever looked at everything I am and then looked at me separately. Like the 2 things were different." He set the glass down. "Everyone else who has ever been in my life wanted the power. The safety. The access. They wanted what I control." A pause. You wanted none of it. You wanted me. And when you decided the rest of it cost too much, you left cleanly. No drama. No leverage. You just walked away. His eyes held hers across the room. That's not something I hate. That's something I respect. Ada's chest was doing something inconvenient. You can't say things like that, she said quietly. I'm saying what's true. Dante. Ada. The way he said her name, like each syllable had been placed with intention. I'm not asking for anything tonight. I brought you here because you asked, and because you were sitting on a fountain in October in satin with tears drying on your face, and I would rather be anywhere doing anything than let that continue. The tears she'd been holding back all evening chose that moment to make themselves known. She looked away from him quickly, pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. He crossed the room in 4 steps. He sat beside her on the couch, close but not touching. She could feel the heat of him along her arm, could feel the precise space he left between them, could feel that he was waiting to see what she needed before deciding what to give. You are not small, he said. Quietly, firmly, the way people speak when they want something to land. You are the furthest thing from small. What he did tonight had nothing to do with your size and everything to do with his. She pressed her lips together. Look at me, he said. She turned. He was closer than she'd realized. The distance she had perceived from the corner of her eye was not the actual distance. He was there, fully, his face at a level with hers, gray eyes holding her with the focused warmth of someone who is not performing care but practicing it. Her pulse was loud. You didn't call me because you needed saving, he said. You called me because you're angry. And you're angry because you know your worth, and what happened tonight insulted it. The tears came anyway. Quietly, one at a time, the kind of tears that are more exhaustion than grief. Dante reached up. With the back of one finger very carefully, he caught the first one before it reached her jaw. She went completely still. The touch lasted less than a second. He pulled his hand back. But the place where his finger had been continued to exist on her skin, warm, present, impossible to ignore. Stay tonight, he said quietly. Just tonight. No other discussion, no negotiation. Sleep. In the morning, whatever you want, I'll arrange it. Her phone buzzed. Simone. She answered on the second ring. Her sister's voice came through the speaker tight, with a complex mixture of worry and accusation, and the particular pitch of a bride whose wedding has been unexpectedly eventful. Ada. What did you do? Who is he? People are saying he's... Ada. People are saying he runs Chicago. I'm fine, Simone. Fine. There were armed men. Marcus is saying someone ran him off the road. Marcus crashed his own car. Ada kept her voice steady. She looked at Dante as she said it. He was watching her with the still patience of someone who is not worried about what is being said because he has already read the shape of what comes next. I'll call you tomorrow. Enjoy your wedding night. She ended the call. Dante raised an eyebrow slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough. Marcus crashed his own car, he said. He was drunk and driving. I'm not giving him the dignity of a conspiracy. She looked at him. Did you? No, he said simply. She searched his face. The gray eyes looked back at her, transparent in the specific way that some men are transparent. Not because they hide nothing but because what they choose to show you is entirely honest. He wasn't lying. But if he touches you again... Don't finish that sentence, Ada said. His jaw moved. He finished it anyway. Silently. In the shift of his expression, Ada looked at this man who had come when she called without asking why, who had collected her from a fountain in the cold like she was something precious that had been left outside, who sat beside her now with the careful deliberateness of someone who understood that the distance between them was a decision only she could make. She was in a great deal of trouble. She knew it the same way she knew that the warmth of his finger on her cheek was still there, that her pulse had not returned to normal, that 11 months of careful distance had dissolved in approximately 45 minutes, and that somewhere in the city outside these windows, something was already moving. Something she hadn't caused and couldn't see, but that Dante could. And the expression on his face when his phone lit up and he looked at the screen told her, before he said a single word, that the night was nowhere near over. He looked at the phone for 3 seconds. Then he stood. The change was immediate and total. The careful, deliberate man on the couch folded away, and what stood in his place was something else. Something that wore the same face and the same suit, but occupied the room differently. Colder. More precise. The version of Dante Romano that Chicago knew and Ada had always been afraid of. What happened? She asked. Stay here. He was already moving toward the door. Dante. Ada. He stopped at the door. Turned. And for just a moment, A fraction of a second, the harder version receded and the man came back. I will be back in this room in under 10 minutes. I need you to trust me for 10 minutes. She looked at him. 9 minutes and 50 seconds, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. Stay. He left. Ada sat alone in the room that smelled like him and tried to listen. She could hear nothing through the walls except the distant low murmur of voices, his clipped and controlled, and another man's, shorter answers, and then the particular silence of people speaking in code. 8 minutes later he returned. The version of him that came back through the door was the cold one. The careful, deliberate man had not quite reassembled himself. Tell me, she said. He sat. Not on the couch beside her, across the room, in the chair by the window. Like he needed the distance now, where before he had chosen proximity. She registered this and filed it. There is a man named Nikolai Petrov, he said. He controls the South Side shipping routes. We have coexisted, not warmly but stably, for 4 years. He looked at his hands. He was at the wedding tonight. Not as a guest. He was watching. He had people there. Ada's stomach dropped. He was watching me? He was watching the situation. Watching to see what I would do. Dante leaned forward, elbows on his knees. In my world, Ada, coming to someone in public the way I came tonight, it sends a message. It tells everyone watching that the person I came for matters to me. He paused. Nikolai has been waiting for something that matters to me. Something he can use. The warmth she had been carrying from the car ride, and the couch, and his finger on her cheek turned into something different. Not cold exactly. Clarified. I'm leverage. I didn't. I'm not angry, she said. I'm thinking. She looked at him steadily. He saw me get into the car. He knows I'm here now. Yes. Which means he'll make a move. He already has. His men were seen near the road where Caleb crashed. Dante's jaw tightened. The crash wasn't entirely accidental. Nikolai wanted chaos around tonight. Wanted police attention. Wanted the scene to look like I was losing control. He caused the crash and let you take the blame. That's his style. Quiet damage. Ada stood. She walked to the window and looked out at the lake. The water was dark and enormous and calm, the kind of calm that has no interest in whatever is happening on its shore. What does he want? She asked. My territory. My supply lines. He's been circling for 2 years, waiting for a pressure point. Dante's voice was even. Factual. He found one tonight. Ada looked at her own reflection in the glass. Ivory gown, composed face. A woman standing in a crime lord's estate at midnight being told she was the reason a war might start. The absurdity of it should have made her laugh. Instead, she felt something sharpen in her chest. Something that was not fear and was not quite anger. Something that felt like purpose. She turned around. You brought me here to protect me, she said. Yes. But now that I'm here, I'm less protected. Because Nikolai knows where I am. Dante looked at her with an expression that was complicated. Like a man who is accustomed to being the smartest person in the room and is reevaluating. Yes. So I'm not safer here, Ada said. I'm centrally located. The pause. Yes. Good, she said. Then we're not hiding. Dante was very still. Ada. You want to send a message, she said. You showed up at a wedding tonight, and every person there now knows that I matter to you. Nikolai saw it. The city saw it. She crossed the room. Not quickly, deliberately, the way he moved, with the intention of each step visible. She stopped in front of him. He was seated, which put his face at the level of her collarbone, and he looked up at her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Something that was not calculation, and was not composure. So send the message properly, she said. Don't hide me. Show them what I am. And what are you? He asked. His voice was quieter than she expected. Rougher at the edges. She looked down at him, at this powerful, dangerous, frightening man who had come when she called without asking why, who had caught a tear on her cheek with the back of one finger, like it was something worth protecting. I'm the woman who walked away from you once, she said. And came back. That's not weakness. Make sure everyone understands that. Something moved across his face. Moved fast, like weather, and then was controlled. But she saw it. In 11 months of absence, she had forgotten that she was one of only a handful of people who could read him. She had forgotten that he had always been a language she spoke. He stood slowly. When he was upright, she had to tilt her chin up to hold his eyes. He was close, closer than the couch, closer than the car. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him again, that particular Dante Romano warmth that was both invitation and warning. If you stay in this, he said softly, it's not one night. I know. If Nikolai believes you matter. I matter, she said. Whether Nikolai believes it or not. His jaw tightened in the way she knew meant he was holding something back. He reached up, the same hand, the same deliberateness, and his thumb traced the line of her jaw. Not urgently. Not possessively. Reverently. The way you touch something you thought you'd lost. Ada. Her name again in that register. Low and certain and warm. Don't, she said quietly. Don't what? Don't say anything that's going to make this harder than it already is. She stepped back. One step. The warmth of his hand left her face, and the cold of the room rushed in to fill it. There's a man with men at the South Docks who just decided I'm your weakness. Deal with that first. Dante looked at her for a moment. Then he smiled. A full one. Rare, real, the kind she had only ever seen in private. It did something to his face that the cold expression never did. Made him look like someone who had carried something heavy for a very long time and was briefly, unexpectedly, not carrying it. You haven't changed, he said. I have, she said. I'm angrier now. His eyes darkened with what she was fairly certain was appreciation. He turned to reach for his phone. And then the window behind him shattered. Glass rained across the floor in a bright cascade. Ada dropped behind the nearest piece of furniture before the sound had finished, her body moving on pure reflex. Dante was already moving. Not toward the window, toward her, covering the distance in 2 steps, his body between her and the dark opening where the lake had been visible a second ago. From somewhere in the estate, shouting erupted. Footsteps. The unmistakable sound of men mobilizing. Nikolai hadn't waited for morning. He hadn't waited for a plan. He had sent his message the same way Dante had sent his. Directly, publicly, without apology. And somewhere in the chaos, Ada realized something that should have frightened her, but instead settled in her chest like the click of a lock engaging. She was not afraid. She was ready. The question was whether Dante would let her be. The estate moved like a living thing. Men appeared from corridors Ada hadn't known existed. Silent, armed, moving in the coordinated silence of people who had rehearsed for exactly this. The lights in the main rooms cut to a low amber. Somewhere below, she heard the thick mechanical sound of steel doors sealing. Dante had her wrist. Not her hand, her wrist. Fingers wrapped around the pulse point in a grip that was firm and careful in exactly equal measure. And he was moving her through the corridor at a pace that was faster than a walk, but refused to become a run. Ada understood instinctively that the pace was deliberate. Running communicated panic. He would not panic in his own house. How many? He asked a man named Marco who materialized at his shoulder. East Perimeter 3. Rooftop 2. The shot came from across the water, long range. Snipers. Dante said it flatly. Not surprised. Locating a fact. A warning, Marco said. They had the angle for center mass. They took the window. Ada processed this. A warning. Nikolai had sent men with rifles to the shores of Lake Michigan to shoot out a window. They could have shot a person through, and chose not to. It was the most expensive kind of restraint she had ever encountered. He wants a conversation, she said. Both men looked at her. If he wanted damage, he'd have done damage, she said. He's showing you what he can reach. He's asking you to the table. Dante held her gaze for a beat. Then, Marco, clear the east corridor. And find out who he sent. I want names, not descriptions. Marco disappeared. They were in the reinforced office now. The room Marco had been guiding them toward. Steel-reinforced walls, she noticed. The art on these walls was bolted, not hung. The desk was positioned away from any window. This room had been designed for exactly this kind of night. Dante released her wrist. She looked at where his hand had been. Could still feel the pressure of his fingers, the exact shape of his grip around her pulse. Sit down, he said. No. He looked at her. Ada. I'm not going to sit in a chair in the corner while you stand in the middle of the room being commanding, she said. I told you. I'm not hiding. Something moved in his jaw. This is not the wedding courtyard. This is. I know what this is, she said. I've always known what this is. That's why I left. She stepped toward him. And I came back. So let me be here. Fully. Or take me home. The word home landed between them with a particular weight neither of them addressed. Dante looked at her for a long moment. The gray eyes moved over her face in the way they always had. Like they were reading something, like her face was a text he returned to for information. And then he made a decision. She could see it happen. A door opening. Nikolai Petrov was my father's partner, he said. 23 years ago. Before I ran anything. Before my father decided I would inherit instead of Nikolai. He sat on the edge of the desk, which was the most informal thing she had seen him do all night, and the informality of it, the weight of him leaning back, jacket pulling slightly across his shoulders, was more intimate than touching would have been. He has been waiting 23 years to take what he thinks should have been his. So this isn't about territory, Ada said. Territory is the language he uses. What he actually wants is to look at me and feel like he won. And tonight gave him something to use. You, Dante said. Not harshly. Just honestly. Me, she agreed. Which means if I leave, if you send me away, he has already succeeded. He's already made me into a liability. Dante was very still. But if I stay, Ada continued, and Nikolai sees that I'm not a pressure point, that I'm not someone you're protecting, but someone who chose to stand beside you, that changes the calculation. You're describing a war, he said quietly. I'm describing a choice. She held his gaze. The same one I walked away from 11 months ago. Except this time I understand what I'm choosing. Dante Romano looked at her across the reinforced office with the shot-out window and the armed men in the corridors and the man on the south docks who had been waiting 23 years for this night. And he looked at her the way he had looked at her in the car. The way he had looked at her on the couch. The way that made her pulse loud. You terrify me, he said. It sounded like the most honest thing he'd said all night. Good, Ada said. Hold on to that. It'll keep you humble. The sound he made was almost a laugh. It transformed his face for one entire second, lit something in the gray eyes, and Ada felt it in her sternum like a bell that had been struck. Then the door opened. Marco. 2 other men. And between them, not restrained but clearly not free, a man Ada didn't recognize. 40-something. Compact, watchful, the quality of someone who had learned stillness as a survival mechanism. He came to the front gate, Marco said. Alone. No weapon. Says Nikolai sent him with a message. Dante straightened off the desk. The cold version assembled itself again, not gradually, immediately. Like a mask lowering. Ada watched it happen and understood, for the first time, how completely these 2 versions of him existed inside the same body. The man who had touched her cheek, and the man who made Chicago go quiet. Speak, Dante said. The messenger looked at Ada, then at Dante. Nikolai says he stopped. Looked at Ada again. Is she safe to hear this? She's here, Dante said flatly. Which answers your question. The messenger blinked. Recalibrated. Nikolai says tomorrow morning. The warehouse on Calumet. Just him and you. Or, the man paused. Or he makes the conversation happen publicly. Publicly, Dante said. He says he has footage. From the wedding. From the crash site. Enough to make things complicated. The messenger's eyes moved briefly to Ada. He says to bring the woman if you want. So she can hear what kind of man she chose. The room was very quiet. Ada felt Dante's stillness beside her, not passive stillness, the kind that precedes movement. The kind that was thinking at a speed she couldn't track. Tell him yes, Dante said. Calumet. 6 a.m. The messenger was escorted out. The room exhaled. Ada turned to Dante. He wants me there. He thinks seeing what I do for a living will drive you away. Dante looked at her. He thinks if you hear the truth of this world from someone who doesn't love you, you'll leave. The word love arrived without warning. He hadn't apparently intended to use it. His expression shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, like a man who has revealed a card before he decided to. Ada looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them addressed it. Get some sleep, he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. We leave at 5:30. He moved toward the door. Dante. He stopped. Turned. She was across the room. He was at the door. The space between them was significant, and both of them felt it. What you said, she said carefully. About this world. About who you are. She held his gaze. I spent 11 months convincing myself I'd made the right choice. That safety was smarter then. She stopped. I wasn't wrong about what you are. I was wrong about what I could survive. He was very still. Turns out, she said quietly, I can survive more than I thought. The look on his face then was not the cold version, and was not the controlled version. It was something she didn't have a name for. Something that required more courage from him than anything else that had happened tonight. He nodded once, crossed back across the room, stopped in front of her, raised his hand and, with the same careful deliberateness as before, tucked a strand of hair from her face. His fingers skimmed her temple. The touch lasted 3 seconds. It felt like a conversation. Sleep, he said. Low. Close. Close enough that the word arrived with warmth. You too, she managed. He stepped back. He left. And Ada stood in the reinforced room in her ivory gown with his fingerprints on her temple and the word love still ringing somewhere in the air. And she understood with total clarity that by 6 the next morning, everything was going to come to a head. Nikolai Petrov. 23 years of waiting. The footage, the crash, the men on the perimeter, the shot-out window. All of it converging on a warehouse on Calumet Avenue. She also understood something else. Something she hadn't planned and couldn't stop. She was going to walk into that warehouse not because Dante had asked her to and not because Nikolai had. She was going to walk in because in a city full of men who had spent the entire night trying to make her feel like a piece on a board, she was about to remind all of them that she had never been anyone's piece. She had always been the player. She didn't sleep. She lay in the guest room of Dante Romano's estate. A room that was spare and beautiful and smelled faintly of cedar from the adjoining room, through a wall she was extremely aware of, and she stared at the ceiling and let the night arrange itself into something she could understand. At 4:30, she heard him moving. The low sound of his voice on the phone, his footsteps on the corridor floor. The unhurried, deliberate stride she could identify, she realized, from sound alone. She had learned him more completely than she had understood. She rose at 5, changed into the clothes his staff had silently produced, dark trousers, a soft sweater, things that were not ivory satin. She found the kitchen by memory and made coffee, and was standing at the counter with 2 cups when Dante appeared in the doorway. He stopped when he saw her. She held out the second cup. He crossed the kitchen, jacket already on, the focused stillness of a man who had been awake for hours and was ready, and took it. Their fingers overlapped on the mug for a longer moment than was necessary. Neither moved away. "You should have slept," he said. "You should have too." She looked at him over the rim of her cup. He looked back. The morning light from the kitchen window made him look different. Softer at the edges, more tired, more human. More dangerous for it. "Tell me what to expect," she said. He set his cup down. "Nikolai will perform. He's theatrical when he feels he has the upper hand. He'll say things designed to make me react and things designed to make you run." He paused. "Do not react to either." "What are you going to say to him?" "Nothing," Dante said. "I'm going to listen. And then I'm going to make an offer." "What kind of offer?" He looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up his coffee again. "The kind he can't refuse without looking weak," he said. "And can't accept without giving up the war." The car was on the drive at 5:30. Ada got in first. Dante followed. The convoy moved through a city that was just beginning its morning. Amber light on wet streets, early delivery trucks, the particular quiet of a city between shifts. They sat beside each other in the back seat. Not across. Beside. The length of a hand's width between them, both facing forward, neither speaking. At some point, she couldn't have said precisely when his hand found hers. Not dramatically. Not with announcement. His hand simply rested on the seat between them, and then her hand was in it, and neither of them looked down, and neither of them spoke, and the city moved past the windows in long quiet stripes while they held on to each other in the gray early light. The warehouse on Calumet was gray and enormous, backing onto the water. Nikolai's men were visible at the perimeter, 12 by Ada's count, positioned without the pretense of concealment. Showing their numbers. Showing their range. Dante's men deployed from the SUVs in mirror formation. The warehouse doors were open. Nikolai Petrov stood in the center of the space, tall, broad, with the particular bulk of a man who had been physically imposing his whole life and had learned to weaponize it. He wore a gray coat and no tie, and the expression of a man who had looked forward to this moment for a very long time. His eyes went to Ada the second she walked through the door. He smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man confirming a theory. "She came," he said, to Dante but looking at Ada. "I wasn't sure she would." "I go where I choose," Ada said pleasantly. Nikolai looked at her with genuine interest. "Do you?" He turned to Dante. "She doesn't know, does she? What it costs? What you've done?" "She's standing in the room," Dante said. "She made her decision. Let me help with her education." Nikolai moved, not toward Ada, circling, the practiced movement of a man who believed space was dominance. "You're Dante Romano, miss," he looked at Ada. "What is your name?" "She's not answering your questions," Dante said. "You're Dante Romano," Nikolai continued. "Inherited what should have been mine. Not through merit. Through birth. Through the specific accident of being someone's son." He looked at Dante. "I built the South routes. I developed the relationships. I did 20 years of work for your father and he chose you." The word landed with weight, because blood. "Yes," Dante said. Nikolai paused. He hadn't expected agreement. That's true, Dante said evenly. My father chose me because I was his son. You're right that you had seniority. You're right that it wasn't entirely fair. A pause. And you have spent 23 years making other people pay for something my father decided. He stepped forward. Not aggressively. Just claiming space. The crash last night. 3 men injured in the estate. A long-range rifle team on a public lakeshore. His voice stayed level. You have been running out of patience for years, Nikolai. And patience is the one thing in this business you cannot afford to run out of. Nikolai's jaw tightened. I have an offer, Dante said. The word landed in the warehouse and changed the atmosphere. The Calumet routes, Dante said. All of them. Title and operation. Transferred to you legally structured within 60 days. He paused. In exchange, you walk away from this war. You walk away from my people and my property and anyone associated with me. Another pause. And you walk away from this city's knowledge of what happened last night. The footage you have, you bury it. Nikolai stared at him. The Calumet routes, he repeated slowly. Everything you said my father owed you. I'm giving it. In exchange for what? Walking away. Nikolai's eyes narrowed. That's not a deal. That's surrender. That's what it looks like from the outside, Dante said. From the inside, what it is me deciding that what I have is worth more than what I'm giving up. He looked at Nikolai steadily. You spent 23 years wanting to win. Here's your win. Take it, and let the rest of us get on with living. Nikolai was silent for a long moment. He looked at Ada. For her, he said. It wasn't a taunt. It was a genuine question. The question of a man trying to understand something that didn't fit his model of how the world worked. For the next 23 years, Dante said. Which I'd prefer to spend differently than the last ones. Ada looked at Dante's profile. At the jaw, the gray eyes, the stillness. At the man who had come when she called without asking why, and was now giving away a third of his empire because he had decided that some things cost more than their worth. She was aware, suddenly, that her heart was doing something completely unreasonable. Nikolai turned away, walked to the far wall, stood there for 30 seconds with his back to the room. Then he turned around. 60 days, he said. And I want Mancini as the liaison. Done. And De Lorenzo. Nikolai looked at him with an expression that was not warmth but was, perhaps, the closest thing to respect he had ever offered. If you treat her badly, I will be very disappointed in you. The absurdity of it. A rival crime lord offering romantic advice in a warehouse on Calumet Avenue at 6 in the morning made Ada press her lips together. Dante's expression didn't change. Noted. Nikolai left with his men. The warehouse was quiet. Outside, the city was fully awake now. Light on the water. Trucks on the avenue. Chicago rolling into its morning completely indifferent to what had just been resolved inside a warehouse on its south side. Ada and Dante stood in the empty space. You gave up the Calumet routes, she said. I gave up what he wanted so he'd stop looking for other ways to take things. Is that the only reason? He looked at her. The gray eyes. The jaw. The careful, deliberate, permanent attention of a man who had never once looked at her like she was less than the full meaning of everything. No, he said simply. Ada walked toward him. 1 step. 2. 3. Until she was close. Close enough that she had to look up, close enough to feel the warmth of him, close enough that the air between them was no longer neutral. 11 months, she said. 11 months, he agreed. I was wrong to think safe and good were the same thing. You weren't wrong to want peace. I know, she said. But I want this more. He raised his hand, the back of his fingers against her cheek. The same gesture, the same exactness, but this time he didn't pull away. He let his hand stay, his palm curving to the shape of her face, his thumb tracing a line below her cheekbone that made her eyes close involuntarily. Ada. Her name. That register. Low and certain and warm and finally, not controlled. She opened her eyes. He was looking at her the way the ocean looks at the shore, like it has been going there forever, and will keep going there, and has never once questioned why. Ask me, she said quietly. He understood immediately. Come home with me. Yes, she said. He kissed her. Not urgently, deliberately. With the same precision and patience he brought to everything, his mouth warm and certain against hers, his hand at her face, her hands gripping the front of his jacket because the world had become briefly and entirely unsteady. The kiss was deep and quiet and full of 11 months of distance collapsing. Of 2 people who had chosen each other in a roundabout, expensive, dramatic way finally arriving at the conclusion the story had been reaching for since a woman sat on a fountain in October and pressed call on a name she had never deleted. When they separated, the morning was fully there, light on the water, the city busy and enormous and indifferent. Ada leaned her forehead against his chest. His arms came around her. One hand at the back of her head, one at the center of her back, holding her with the completeness of a man who has learned not to take things for granted. "Chicago is going to talk," she said. "Chicago always talks. Your enemies will recalibrate. They always do. This isn't going to be quiet." "No," he agreed, his voice above her head, low and certain and at rest. "It's going to be ours." The convoy was waiting. The city was waiting. The next chapter of whatever this was, this dangerous, deliberate, irreversible thing, was waiting. Ada Mensah had walked out of her sister's wedding in an ivory gown with tears drying on her face, and called a number she'd sworn she would never call. She had not been rescued. She had not been claimed. She had made a choice, 3 words, 1 call, 1 fountain, 1 man, and let the choice make the rest of the story. She pulled back from his chest, looked up at him. "Buy me breakfast," she said. The smile again, the full one, the rare one, the one that lit the gray eyes from the inside. "Anything you want," he said. And they walked out into Chicago together. The city watched. The city always watched. But this time, what it saw was not leverage and loss and the cold machinery of men who confused power with dominance. What it saw was a woman who had remembered who she was. And a man who had been waiting, in the particular patient way of dangerous men with too much to lose, for her to remember it. Chicago would whisper. It always did. But some stories, the city tells not as warnings but as proof. Proof that the right call made at the right moment to the right person can change everything. 3 words. "Come get me." That was all it took. Welcome back, besties. If your heart is racing right now, that's exactly right. Because this is what happens when you stop accepting less than you deserve. When you walk out of situations that insult you. When you make 1 call to the person who's been waiting, not to rescue you, but to stand beside you while you save yourself. Ada Mensah didn't need saving. She needed witnessing. She needed someone who would show up when she called without asking why. She needed a man who looked at her and saw not a woman to protect, but a woman worth going to war for. And Dante Romano? He gave up 1/3 of his empire. The Calumet routes, years of work, millions of dollars, because he decided that what he had with her was worth more than what he was giving up. That's not weakness, besties. That's power. Real power. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself. Drop a comment right now if this story made you rethink what you're accepting in your own life. Drop a yellow heart if you believe the right person will come when you call, without hesitation, without judgment, without making you explain why you need them. Drop a fire if Dante Romano just reset your entire standard for what a man should be. And besties? If you're sitting in a situation right now that makes you feel small, whether it's a relationship, a job, a friendship, a family dynamic, remember this. You have 3 words that can change everything. You have a choice. You have the power to walk out of rooms that don't honor you and call the people who will. Ada spent 11 months convincing herself she'd made the right choice by walking away from danger. Turns out, the safest choice isn't always the right one. Sometimes the right choice is the one that makes you feel something. That reminds you you're alive. This is Afro-K Dark Diaries TV, and that was 3 words at midnight. Like this video if Ada's courage just inspired yours. Subscribe for more stories about women who refuse to be small and men who are strong enough to let them be powerful. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they deserve more respect, more presence, more truth. Until next time, besties, remember, the right person doesn't make you beg for attention. They show up. They stay. They choose you publicly, consistently, and without apology. Now go make that call. You know the one. Comment below. Who's your Dante Romano? Tag them. Let them know. We'll see you in part 2.